In this video, I'm going to revisit some of the things that Ben Johnson and the Detroit Lions were able to do to thwart Brian Flores' defensive structure at times. Also consider it a tip of the cap to what I think the Vikings do and a begrudging admiration that I think I am beginning to have of Brian Flores. I think that he is trying to navigate or balance the fact that they don't have a ton of great man-to-man defenders in their secondary. And I understand that Vikings fans listening, may not enjoy hearing that. And by doing so, he's doing so on second and long and third downs, third and four or more, in situations where he's trying to give the quarterback different looks and then sometimes drop out of them. And of course, and others bring a significant amount of pressure at the quarterback. What they do is fun to watch in some ways. And when I say that, I'm saying to turn off my fandom of the Lions after the game, now that Detroit has gotten the win. I want to break down a little bit further, the sticks blitz zero concept, and specifically the drop eight that Brian Flores uses out of it, and how I think it can interrupt the flow of a quarterback's processing. And in fact, I think that was the most effective aspect or most effective coverage choice that the Vikings had on Sunday. Of course, it didn't work out. Detroit was able to get a 31-29 win. At one point, I think they scored on 4 consecutive possessions. The David Montgomery fumble gets taken back to the house by Ivan Pace, essentially hands the Vikings a lead that Ben Johnson's offense slowly and methodically erases on a last-second drive or game-winning drive that resulted in Jake Bates' 44-yard field goal. Going to get to the film, and what I want to highlight first is a basic establishing shot of what happens if you fall behind against Brian Flores' defense at times, at least in 2024, but 2023 as well, and wherever he's gone. This is a 3rd and 6 against the Jets from the week before their loss to the Lions. Basically, a free rush off the edge by Harrison Smith. If your offensive line and running backs aren't able to account for the numbers, he's just going to put more guys on the line of scrimmage than you are able to block because you have a quarterback who's receiving the snap. Therefore, it's 10 on 11. Theoretically, he could line up all 11 guys at the line of scrimmage, and the quarterback would throw the ball immediately. He's tried to find the balance of that, and he's not the only one. In this case, got 7 on the line of scrimmage. If you just do the math, you've got 1 quarterback, 4 receivers lined up outside of the tackles. So from a mathematical standpoint, it's 7 for 6. We all know that someone is going to drop out typically, and in fact, in this game, they used the dropping out from the line of scrimmage quite effectively. Andrew Van Ginkel had a pick 6, so it's well established what they do there. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum, something that happened early in the Lions' win against Minnesota on Sunday. This is a 3rd and 3 in the first quarter. In fact, I think it's Detroit's second possession after the failed fake punt on 4th down. And watch what they do up front here. They certainly are making it look similar to the look I just showed you, except now you have 5 DBs at depth because it's a nickel look by the Vikings against 11 personnel. Post-snap, it certainly turns into a cover 2 if you were to pause it right here, but with a corner. Now, this is actually a safety who's pushed, a nickel safety who's pushed into the flats. But you would call this a half-field safety from a coverage standpoint. Half-field safety, Mike linebacker who could theoretically run with a vertical. The problem is you've got an additional player here. Why? Because it's only a 3-man rush. And I think that the 3-man rush is far more effective at certain moments, even in the NFL, regardless of date, meaning 2024, 2021, when, oh, by the way, the Bengals used it to great effect in their road win in the AFC Championship game against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, 2011 or 2001. In my opinion, the 3-man rush can interrupt the processing of the quarterback because they're so used to 4-man rushes being utilized almost unanimously. And here you've got 6 guys lined up at the line of scrimmage, 3 of them dropping out, 1 of them late, in fact. And those 3 players, in my opinion, are clogging up the potential throwing lanes for Jared Goff. Yeah, you do have an opening here, which actually happens to be an opening consistently in this coverage against the Vikings, at least in 2024. Not saying that it's always there, but the problem for Jared Goff is he's got a defender in the way, number 1. Number 2, you do have triangulated defenders who theoretically could break on it, but I think the opportunity is certainly there to throw it. Sam Laporta is bringing his route back into the middle of the field against the Mike linebacker. You get the idea. You've got two wildly disparate concepts that I just showed you. The all-out blitz against Aaron Rodgers that people sometimes call man. There's actually I would say a half man, half zone technique to it. And then the three-man drop, essentially a Tampa 2, if you ask me, that they showed against the Lions on the first possession. Let's look at a couple of illustrations of it. And for comparison's sake, show you a basic Tampa 2. So normally you're getting a four-man rush. We'll give the end zone angle so you can see it, and then we'll come back to the all-22. This is a 3rd and 7. I actually used this play in my preview of the Lions-Vikings game last week. But again, consider this a tip of the cap and some begrudging admiration of what they do over there defensively with the Vikings. Stop the run, put you in 2nd and 8, and then 3rd and 6, and force you into situations like this where the quarterback's got to process offensive line, has got to process who's blitzing, who's not. And in this case, it's a ridiculous play by a backup inside linebacker for the Vikings who actually has 2 interceptions on the year. But you get the idea. It's a Tampa 2, 4-man rush. That's the typical iteration, the typical usage of it. And oftentimes in 2024, that's the area that is targeted, whether it's the drop 8 Tampa 2, is what I'm going to call it, the sky mix Tampa 2, or the typical Tampa 2 like this one, where you have your 2 half-field safeties, a corner up top in the flats, a corner up top in the flats, a Mike linebacker. It could be a nickel defender at times. It could be a dime linebacker. The Ravens do this with Kyle Hamilton. And then 2 defenders on the hash, a very geometrical use of a geometrically appropriate usage of your players given the width and the depth of the field on a 3rd and 7. That's a typical Tampa 2 with a 4-man rush. One other iteration of it, and this one is against San Francisco. 4-man rush on a 1st and 20. Mike linebacker isn't going to get as much depth. He doesn't run with a vertical because no vertical shows. It actually ends up being completed in that same hole that I kind of described to you between the corner, the half-field safety, in this case I think it's Harrison Smith, and then the linebacker dropping on the hash. I think that's Cashman, who didn't play against the Lions. My apologies, Cashman is 51. That's Andrew Van Ginkel. So you get the idea. You've got a 4-man rush that is typical. This, however, is not. So really nice delineation of the coverage. Now you have a little bit of a differential in terms of spacing here with the way the corner relates to the receiver, because first of all, you got a compressed split, meaning the receiver's not lined up as wide as he typically would be, number one. And then number 2, post-snap, he goes to the inside of the corner, so the corner presses him in and then settles into the flats. But you have the same exact coverage dynamic that I just described against the 49ers. Half-field safety, Mike linebacker, theoretically who could run with a vertical, hash defender, corner, and then here is the 8th dropper. Hence why I'm calling it a drop 8 Tampa 2 with a 3-man rush. It ends up being a completion underneath on a 2nd and 12 from Love to one of the tight ends. I think it's Musgrave. And that's the idea. I think that's the appropriate usage of it. If the Vikings, can get you behind the sticks, 2nd and 12, 2nd and 11, on theoretically a 1st down run play this drop 8 coverage, force you to throw it underneath, create a 3rd and 7 where they can bring their chaos. Now, it hasn't always worked in this year, to be honest with you. Some would describe this as a cover 3. I'm saying this is still a Tampa 2 with an underneath dropper. It's a 3rd and 10. And Aaron Rodgers makes some magic happen. He escapes out of there because it's only a 3-man rush. So that's the balance. Sometimes the rush aspect or the rush element doesn't get there. And in this case, it does not. He's able to find Allen Lazard for a 14-yard touchdown over the middle where theoretically the defense has a bonus coverage player. It's a great throw by Aaron Rodgers after a scramble. One more iteration of it, and I don't have the all-22 of this one. My apologies. I think you might have a slight variation of how the Vikings are getting this done. And we are getting back to Lions film from week 7 here in a moment, because I want to show you that Ben Johnson and Jared Goff had answers for a lot of this. And in fact, I think forced Brian Flores into a technical change during the game. And you see an example of that in the third quarter. But getting back to this play, 3-man rush. Here's your 8th dropper, in my opinion. That's the extra guy that, quote, shouldn't be there. Jordan Love's pass is broken on by the safety. In this case, it's Bynum. Incomplete, intended for Kraft, the tight end. So you get the idea of the differential between the sticks coverage, the normal Tampa 2, and then your drop 8 Tampa 2. So another iteration of it. Sticks look, so faking the blitz on a 3rd and 5 against the 49ers, and dropping 2, again, a very appropriate usage of your personnel from a geometric standpoint. Normally, I would label this a corner, but that is Harrison Smith. Normally, I would label this a safety, but that is Gilmore, and he's a corner. So essentially, it's an invert Tampa 2 here. We would just call it sky. Sky would normally refer to cover 3. This is your Mike Backer in the middle of the field. Hash defender, corner. And again, this should be a corner, but in essence, personnel-wise, it is Harrison Smith, a safety. The same exact concept that I described. In fact, a 4-man rush out of it produces an incompletion. Hopefully, there's not too much information here, number one. Hopefully, I'm providing you evidence that this is a zone-based defense from a personnel standpoint. Do I think that Brian Flores plays more man at times? Of course. But I think the sticks blitz 0 is not actually a man coverage scheme, the way that it's applied post-snap. And that's a point of contention between myself and others. I understand that. So let's switch gears for a moment and show you one thing that they did coming into the game, and then how later on in a moment we'll show you how Ben Johnson and Jared Goff exploited. This is a 6-2 look on a 4th and 2. It's going to be a run up the middle by Allen for no gain. The Vikings and Brian Flores utilize this 6-2 often in these short yardage situations. There's your 4 down linemen, OLB, 2 inside linebackers, Cashman and 44. I think it's Bennett, but I could be wrong. It's a nice fill by Cashman. Also Turner, I think the rookie, is involved in the play. So you get the idea. 6-2 look, and it's effective. In fact, it was early against Detroit. First quarter, 12 personnel on the field, 3rd and 1, and you got 4 down linemen, outside linebacker, 2 inside linebackers, Pace and 44. So only 3 DBs on the field, 2 corners and 1 safety. The Vikings obviously stuff it for no gain. I think Detroit is going to line up to go for it on the ensuing play, the 4th down, and instead ends up with a delay or a false start, something of that manner, a penalty nonetheless, and ends up in a 4th and 6 situation, has to punt. Well, check out what Ben Johnson and those guys did later on in the game, and this is why I inserted the 6-2 commentary into this video in the middle, because I think this is extremely important. Now, there's a minute 22, minute 23 left in the game, something like that. Ball is on the 36, so theoretically you're already in field goal range. It would be a longer field goal. And on a 1st and 10, they've gone 12 personnel. This is the last drive where Detroit has been running the ball. They slow played it. They left the playbook as wide as possible to use run or pass concepts, and took advantage of Minnesota thinking that Jared Goff was going to be operating in 2-minute mode. He was not. They were operating in like 6-minute mode. And now, on a 1st and 10 with a minute 23, somewhere in that area left, they've gone 12 personnel, the same exact look that I just showed you on that 3rd and 1 earlier. And Brian Flores responded with his 6-2 look. 4 down linemen, 2 OLBs, 2 inside backers, only 3 secondary players from personnel standpoint, 2 corners and 1 safety, Harrison Smith. And what does Jared Goff run? A play action concept over the top of the second level of the defense. Basically, it gave Harrison Smith a longer run to get to the point of attack. St. Brown's over concept. You got to clear out by Patrick. St. Brown from the other side of the field. Why am I bringing this one up? The point of the whole video is to show respect for what both of these guys did. Brian Flores' group on defense, and then how Ben Johnson had answers for it that were built in. We're going to rewind here in a moment from a gameplay standpoint. But this play, if you ask me, just illustrates the almost magician's nature that Ben Johnson has at times in terms of, I'm going to show you this and do that. I'm going to show you this and then do the same thing I just did. Later on in the game, I'm going to show you the same look as those previous two plays and then go and reveal my true intentions, which is to throw the ball against this 6-2. It's a great throw by Jared Goff. It's a great catch by St. Brown. The offensive line gave Goff a nice pocket to throw the football from. 97 and Ragnow are in a one-on-one battle here. Ragnow's trying to win when he's losing. So what I mean by that is stay on the guy even if you're losing, but don't hold. And Goff gets the throw off, perfectly placed. St. Brown, great catch for 14 yards. The margin of error was small, even against that 6-2 look. Let's get back to a couple of the points that I talked about earlier in the game, and then I'll kind of illustrate the even more deepening level of admiration I have for Ben Johnson's ability to call the right play at the right time. This is that drop 8 Tampa 2 in the first quarter where Goff technically goes down as a sack for Ivan Pace on a 3rd and 3 during the period of time when Minnesota's defense is A, playing extremely fast, and B, Detroit really can't get anything done on offense. I've already kind of annotated it before. You get the idea. 3-man rush, preventing Goff from any of those interior throwing lanes. Basically, look at how many players are involved from top of the numbers to top of the numbers. I'm not including this player here. 4 guys stacked between the top of the numbers, essentially jamming up the middle of the field. Yes, that's a little bit of an oversimplification. Goff has nowhere to go the football. Either St. Brown or Laporta ends up being a sack that forces a turnover. Now, how did the game play out over the course of 4 quarters? Well, when the Vikings, are stopping the run, putting you in 2nd and long or 3rd down situations. This is 2nd 11. Obviously, as you see, I still can't get my graphics to be oriented even. I have no idea why that graphic is popping up in such a crooked manner, so my apologies for that. But what I love about this, and I think multiple people have covered it, and I have as well, is that the running back and Patrick, who go in motion, are both dealing with the edge defender. They have foolproof the pass pro. My suspicion is that if the edge defender didn't show, my suspicion is that Patrick would just keep going out into the flats and be used as a possible release valve. Already discussed in previous videos how Goff manipulated this safety by looking over here. Yes, Jamison Williams is wide ass open off screen to our left as well. Just like St. Brown, it's a 35-yard touchdown. It's a great throw. It's a great play. It's a great scheme and design from Ben Johnson. Moving forward a little bit here, I think we're already up 14-10 at this point after the 45-yard touchdown by Gibbs, after the touchdown pass to St. Brown that I just showed you, and we're now late in the 2nd quarter, and you get sticks here by the Vikings, but they drop out into a Tampa 2. Did Goff know this? Did Ben Johnson know this? I'm not sure. I also wonder about how many times Ben Johnson and the offensive staff had seen Minnesota check out of some of their blitzes. I don't see anyone making a check here, but when St. Brown motions over, look at these guys communicating here, here, and here. It's Pace, Van Ginkel, and I think Gilmore says something to them briefly, which causes... That's not Van Ginkel, my apologies, Harrison Smith. So those guys have made a check. Look at Bynum again. Comes up to the line of scrimmage, it's empty. And then as St. Brown motions over, I think the Vikings, understand that if they bring a particular blitz, that they've opened themselves up potentially down here to the trip side. It's a 2nd and 11, about 2:20 left in the 2nd quarter. Was Bynum going to drop out anyway? I don't know. I'm speculating a little bit. I think that Goff and those guys may have dissuaded them from running the blitz, and then Goff knew where the weakness was going to be. Earlier in the video, I talked to you about the weakness of that drop 8 Tampa 2, which is what this is, in my opinion. The weakness so far has been to the boundary side in between the top of the numbers and the hash. Now, we've got a mirrored image of it on this particular play. This is actually not the drop 8. My apologies. This is a 4-man rush by Minnesota. It's a vertical corner by Williams, and then Laporta kind of bringing his route in here. He's not really running a dig because he doesn't want to run it over the top of a Mike linebacker who's getting depth with a vertical. But since they changed the pass strength, since the Lions motioned St. Brown over, there's 3 over here. Look at this middle of the field defender. His back is turned. I think Goff and Ben Johnson had a built-in play call here if they suspected that Flores was going to show sticks and then have his guys drop out. They wanted to have the pass strength to their left, away from Laporta, because Goff knew he was going to come back to that route. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm too much into conspiracy theory mode or speculation. Feel free to let me know in the comments section. I'm not capable of breaking it down without speculative thoughts popping up in my head. So if you don't enjoy that part, feel free to let me know in the comments section. Maybe it's an illustration of how limited my own understanding is, obviously compared to guys like Ben Johnson, Brian Flores, and pretty much everyone on NFL staff. Finally, another third down. This is late second quarter, 3rd and 7 from the 8. And we've broken this one down twice already. The point here is every time that Brian Flores was in a particular look, sticks, I think the Lions had a separate set of offensive play calls to go to. And if the Vikings, didn't show sticks, then Goff and those guys were just going to run the regular play that was called. Maybe I have it backwards. Maybe Ben Johnson was calling the sticks blitz 0 beaters first, and then Goff had a separate play call against, quote, normal looks. We're now into the third quarter, and it's 8.5 minutes left on a 3rd and 9. What should we see? We should see 7 or 8 guys lined up on the line of scrimmage. That's what Brian Flores has been doing. We're not. I think that because they had so many built-in solutions to Flores' unique looks, we'll call them unique looks, even though a lot of teams use them in the NFL, they've now, I think, funneled or maybe forced Flores and the Vikings defense into more typical coverage structures. And in this case, it's a 3rd and 9, 3 D linemen on the field, Van Ginkel being the variable guy. He's an outside linebacker. He can play inside linebacker and pretty much do anything. And now you've got what looks like straight man here. Goff check to his preferred matchup, which in this case was Raymond against Gilmore. Gilmore's a borderline Hall of Fame career, if you ask me. I think he's a great player. Defensive player of the year at one point. At this point, at least from what I've seen on film, doesn't look like the same quality of high-level man-to-man coverage. But, hey, look, he's so talented and so smart and experienced. It's entirely possible over the course of the next 8, 9, 10 games in the regular season, he gets 3 or 4 more picks and takes 1 or 2 back to the house. He's an impressive guy, very smart, in my opinion, and I think the world of him from a talent and execution standpoint. But this is where Goff wanted to go. This is the matchup that Goff wanted to go to, even though he's got St. Brown here, Jamison Williams on the outside, and Laporta into the boundary. And in fact, they went to that matchup 3 times on that particular possession. I think this is an illustration of the game within the game swinging in Ben Johnson and Goff's favor, meaning they have answered the sticks blitz 0 questions repeatedly to this point. Again, we're third quarter. This is same possession. Such that Brian Flores has gone away from that threatening look of putting 6, 7, or 8 guys on the line of scrimmage and then getting you into the paradigm where you have to decide as a quarterback post-snap, okay, are they actually blitzing all these guys? Are they dropping 2 of these guys out? Is it predetermined? All of the questions that brings up in your mind, they're no longer even being posed by Brian Flores. We're at 2 plays later after that 3rd down win by Raymond against Gilmore. It's a 2nd and 15 after a penalty, and what do you notice? It's a typical look with a too high safety structure. Certainly prior to Week 7, Brian Flores and the Vikings defense had shown typical looks at times, no doubt. They've been dissuaded, in my opinion, by Goff's execution level and Ben Johnson's design. This is a perfectly thrown ball from Jared Goff. This will be the last play that we'll diagram, and we've talked about this one already as well. After watching the Ravens play Monday night and destroy Tampa Bay's defense and doing as many offensive film study videos as I could on the Ravens offense, I was like, oh, I wanted to take some time away from that before I went into a deep examination this morning of the Ravens' defensive problems. I finished a couple of film study videos to that point. I went back to some Lions film today because I had a couple of hours time on my hand. And I thought to myself, why would Flores go away from those high pressure looks? They didn't phase Goff at all. They didn't phase Goff at all. Yes, Minnesota got stops on the first 3 possessions. Ben Johnson and the offensive staff did their homework. I am not one who, prior to the game, was scared of Minnesota's defense. I think Brian Flores is an excellent coach, but I didn't find myself feeling scared from the standpoint of hoping and wishing for a Lions win. After the game, even though Detroit put up 30 points on his defense again, I think Flores and Ben Johnson are both going to be head coaches next year. I think both of them will be head coaches for someone, and it wouldn't surprise me if they end up in the same division. I don't know what division that is in the NFL. I'm not projecting any certain teams to suddenly need 2 head coaches in the same division. My point is these 2 guys are fun to watch against each other. Over the last 2 years, 3 games, we have a ton of data that the answers that Ben Johnson's able to come up with to the structure of Brian Flores' defense, what he does generally, they are sound answers by the Lions, Johnson and Goff duo. Dan Campbell's involved as well. Nonetheless, I can't wait to see these 2 teams play again. It really reminds me of like a much hyped boxing match or UFC fight whereby it ends up being a great fight and you kind of can't wait for those 2 fighters to match up again. In those situations, you're normally waiting 3 months or so for the guys to heal up and be able to train and get ready to do it again. Here, we get to see these 2 teams match up again in Detroit later on in the season. I wanted to put this video out to explain my thoughts on the drop 8 effectiveness and say officially that I think of the coverage choices that Brian Flores was able to put out there on film on Sunday against Jared Goff, they were actually the most effective. And that sounds crazy because normally Minnesota is bringing pressure, forcing you into quick decisions, and in some cases you're throwing the ball into zones and guys are making plays like I showed at least one instance of with the Mike linebacker making an interception against Jordan Love in a Tampa 2. Man, I appreciate you guys' time if you sat through this much of the video, some of it being conjecture on my part, obviously, or speculative. That's where my brain went in watching the 3rd and 4th quarter in terms of how Minnesota, I felt, adjusted or was forced to adjust. And then things swung in their favor, obviously, when they get the fumble return for a touchdown, kind of a random play. And the Lions go into another mode, which I'll cover late Wednesday night, their slow-down game-winning drive. It is just pure genius. I've talked about it a couple of times already, once in the reaction video, once in the video I did about Goff. I want to cover it a little more in detail and compare it to 2 other somewhat similar drives that I've seen in the past from the Ravens. Appreciate you guys' time, man. If you're a Lions fan or a Vikings fan, you sat through this much of it. First of all, thank you. Second of all, let me know what you thought of the video in the comment section. The way that I structured the plays to illustrate how Ben Johnson and those guys, I think, solved the looks that are put out there on film by the Vikings defense and really set us up for a fun game to watch in the rematch later in the year. Appreciate you guys' time, man.